Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a good time. I decided to rank all of the discontinued palettes in my eyeshadow collection. I actually had a lot. I had a lot. Like a lot more than I thought I did. I got this video idea from Rachel Palmieri. Hers is linked down below in the description box, so let's get going. I think I have 18 palettes to talk about today. That's just a very cursory count. I'm not going to take a ton of time on each palette. I don't want to linger because that would make this video go on forever. I am filming kind of early in the morning and I'm expecting my kids to wake up soon, so I'm just going to get rolling. And if you're curious about today's eyeshadow look, it was filmed. It's also linked down below. Let's jump in with the very bottom of the list. I will put the numbers in the screen because I don't actually know how many I have. I'm starting with the Limoncello palette from ColourPop. I love the concept of this palette. I love the packaging. It's absolutely beautiful. It's textured, it's interesting. It's so reminiscent of the time that I spent living in Italy. The reason that this one is at the bottom is twofold. First off, it's ColourPop. I like ColourPop, I don't love them, and they don't compare favorably to all of my indie shadows. So it's a good formula, and this is a good formula for ColourPop, but it's not their best, and I get frustrated with ColourPop's inconsistency. The second reason rather, is the color story. It's just a very warm tone neutral palette with a few pops of color. The pops of color are nice, and the palette is beautiful, beautiful packaging. I could have this as a display piece, but it doesn't hardly ever get used, and again, it doesn't compare super favorably to everything else. And along those lines, we have the At For Our Sight palette when they collaborated with Raw Beauty Kristi. Again, I love the packaging and the theming. I love the way that they just the attention to detail on this palette. And I love the watercolor. It's so beautiful. The color story is beautiful. I wish it had maybe one lighter tone. It has some nice depth aside from that. It has pretty colors assortment. I prefer the matte heavy aspect, and the shimmers are good quality, and I like that you have a gold and a silver shimmer. But again, it's the formula. It's the fact that there's not a lighter color. This palette ranked higher than Limoncello because it is colorful, and it's a beautiful color story. It's just the formula. It doesn't do much for me anymore. Nomad America's Parks. This palette was given to me by a subscriber, and I think this color story is really fun. I think it's pretty, kind of like a colorful neutral or a neutral colorful kind of vibe. This one is ranked lower simply because there are a lot of other palettes that when I decided to do this ranking, I had love and like, and then within the love and like categories, it was, okay, which color stories excite me? Which ones do I actually use more than others? So this one ranked low because I've only used it a few times. It's pretty new to my collection, and because it's much more neutral leaning, and I tend towards more colorful looks. So while I do really like this palette, and I especially like the shimmer formula, this is a nice sparkly formula from Nomad. It's not hard pressed. Everything performs well. I think it's maybe not their absolute best matte formula, but it's really more the color story that it's fun, but it's also quite neutral leaning. Back to ColourPop, we have the Through My Eyes palette when they collaborated with I Love Sarai. I think this palette is pretty. They did the kaleidoscope effect on their Play It Jewel palette, and this one was so much better because the Play It Jewel palette just felt chaotic. This is a monochromatic kaleidoscope, so the lettering actually shows up, and it's just got better details. I prefer the packaging. This one also has a mirror. I think this color story is really fun. This is a very unique color story. I don't often see the bronze and teal and dusty rose sort of colors together, but they're really pretty. I like the formula in this palette. Again, it's not my tip-top favorite, but I think it's better than a lot of what ColourPop puts out, even though this is older. This palette actually has gotten a decent amount of use, and it has a nice balance of lightness and depth in mattes and shimmers. It's got an inner corner highlight. It's got some good transition tones. It's a good palette, and I do like it. Keep in mind that these sorts of rankings are rather subjective to maybe the content creator's mood or just what they're into at the moment. So if I were to do this again in a year, maybe the places would be different. Here is the Age of Opulence palette from Beauty Bay. I had this palette, decluttered it because I fought with the formula, got a lot more experience, and then someone gave me the palette again. So now I have it back in my collection, and I think that this is New Year's Eve in a palette. Look at these very highly saturated and deeply pigmented colors, and it does actually have a couple of lighter tones. Now we don't have a really light blue or a really light purple, but you can work with the colors that they did give you on the lighter side to sort of buff out the colors that are here. This palette is ranking where it is because I just don't tend to reach for this color story very often, and in my head it's a very dark palette, so I want some contrast, and this can give me the depth, but I feel like I have to pull in other things to get the lightness, especially if I don't want my lightness to be a natural color or neutral. I want it to be maybe a pastel blue or a pastel pink or purple. I need to bring in something else. I do really like the neutral shimmers in this palette because they're pretty. I enjoy the Beauty Bay formula. It's not my tip-top favorite, but it is good. That segues me nicely into the Dark Fantasy palette, also from Beauty Bay. This one I have placed higher because it has a more varied color story. Age of Opulence is basically blue, purple, brown. This one has several different tones. These colors would work pretty well with Age of Opulence, but again, we're missing some lightness. Beauty Bay's 20-pan palettes are always so dark. There's not a lot of lightness. They need to do like a full pastel version or just balance out their palettes a little bit more. There is some lightness here, obviously, this one as well. And then we have lighter shimmers, which I do like the lighter shimmers, honestly. If I had to choose, I would choose dark mattes, light shimmers. But for a fully well-rounded look, I want a little of all those options in both matte and shimmer formula. I like this pop of green. I like this black with sparkle in it. They don't dust away. They do stay put decently well, and they're kind of a silvery blue sparkle, so that's fun. This is a pretty palette, and I kept thinking I was going to declutter it, but then when I use it, I like the looks. So it's safe, and it has to rank higher than Opulence because it's just a more varied color story. Here's the Surge palette from Blend Bunny Cosmetics, recently discontinued because neons are very, very expensive to formulate. I have not used this palette a lot, but I really enjoy the undertones of this palette. I like the range of depth, and like I said, the undertones. It's not clear-cut pastel, mid, and deep, and neon. The undertones are really interesting. They're kind of desaturated, weird, sort of murky, kind of swampy, kind of not. They're not primary colors, you know, and that's what I really like about this palette is the interesting colors that you can get from it. Like, this is not orange. This is like a blood orange vermilion with a bit of brown, you know. It's not a straightforward color, and that's what draws me to this palette. So I haven't used it a ton, but I do have to rank it higher than other palettes, which I have used more simply because I like the color story. The next place I'm going to rank together two of the palettes that I have between Sydney Grace and Temptalia. This one is Quintessence, and it looks like this. Very pretty, very jewel toned, very cool toned. I do enjoy the gray transition shades of this palette and the fact that it has some depth. The shimmers are really beautiful. It's a very, I was gonna say soft or quiet, but it's not. It's just a very smooth and creamy formula. And then here is On the Horizon. I think both of these are in light. No, actually, On the Horizon is deep, and then Quintessence is light. I got them both secondhand. Quintessence was given to me. On the Horizon I bought because I loved these green and the fiery peach over here. Again, this palette needs a lighter matte, and these two are too close. Actually, the shimmer looks darker on me than the matte, so I wish that there were a difference in depth here, but overall it's really pretty. It's more shimmer heavy, but the shimmers are beautiful. I really, 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 really enjoy the Sydney Grace formula. The mattes are amazing. They are probably my favorite matte formula. The shimmers are gorgeous. They're extremely creamy and very, very pigmented. They're so lovely and refined, but they're not quite as sparkly as I want. I want a slightly more sparkly formula. So Sydney Grace is great, and these, I'm just going to put these at the same spot because I use them about equally as far as how often and frequently I use them. We're halfway through and the kids are still sleeping, so let's keep going. Here is the Hummingbird palette from Udensai, part of the original Legendary Diversa collection. This is when they collaborated with Tina from the Fancy Face. And this is such a fun palette. This is so much fun. I absolutely love the Udensai formula, so you'll see several Udensai palettes in here. And I think this color story is great. It's so vibrant and bright. Tina's other collab with Sydney Grace is the same way. It's just really, really vibrant and colorful. My only qualm with this palette is that for these two tones here, there's not a lighter matte. For these two, we have the light blue, but those two feel like they're kind of just stuck. Like you need to bring in something else or just deal with them as they are. The shimmers in here are absolutely gorgeous. This one over here reminds me of, what's it, like the shade called Gorgeous in the Christmas Eve palette? You know, I'll have to check that out when we get there because that one's also discontinued. Beautiful. This is one of the best lime green shimmers in my whole collection. It's really, really fun, and it's pretty much a complete palette if you go for the blue-purple color story. Next, we have Naughty from BH Cosmetics. Somebody gave this to me, and at first I didn't even open it. Like, it was new, still sealed and whatnot, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just pass along. And then I opened it, and I was very impressed by the formula. It's a really big palette, and it's a little more neutral leaning than I would choose for myself if I were to buy it, but I'm grateful that somebody gave it to me because I wouldn't have tried it otherwise. I have done an entire week using this Naughty palette. I have a week of playlist. I'll link it up here for you if you're curious. It's where I dedicate a week of uploads to just one palette. So I've got a week of several Udens Eye palettes. I've got a week of Juvia's Place, I've got a week of this one, lots of different brands represented in that playlist. So I came up with 4 very, very, very pretty looks using this palette, and each one genuinely surprised me because even though the palette is kind of neutral leaning, it has enough color to be really exciting, and the formula was beautiful. The shimmers were really creamy but still nice and a little bit sparkly and metallic. It surprised me, and I do like it. Also from BH Cosmetics, now I have the Blueberry Muffin palette, part of their brunch series, and I used to own this Mimosa, Avocado Toast, and the Frosé highlighter. I now own just this in Frosé because I've decluttered the other ones. I just really enjoy this color story. This has a nice blue silver sort of color story, a couple of brown tones which are amazing. Again, it has lightness and depth. I do wish that there was a bit more variety among the shimmers. I think they're all pretty close. You know, we could take out like 3 of these shimmers and instead put in maybe 1 or 2 periwinkle tones in matte and shimmer. That would make the palette even better, but the formula is amazing. And again, the shimmer formula is so smooth and creamy. This one does have more sparkle though than Sydney Grace. It's really fun to play with, and it doesn't get a ton of use because I have a larger collection, but every time I do use this palette, I am pleased with the look. Beauty Bay gets one more mention with one of my all-time favorite palettes. Here is the Wilderness. They always discontinue their 20 pans, even though they're like the best ones. Okay, Wilderness palette is just a tried and true favorite in my collection. I've also done a week of Wilderness. There are so much variety within this color story, and again, lightness and depth, matte and shimmer. We have a lot of different tones. We have some cool tones, some warm tones. I like the theme. You know, it's kind of like sky goes down to earth. This half of the palette's cool toned, this half of the palette's warm toned. There are some blues and some greens and some yellows and some reds, some murky and grungy and swampy kinds of colors, and then some lighter, crisp and clean colors. It's just a really well-balanced palette. It's visually appealing. This shade right here, Ray, is such an interesting color. I could see myself hitting pan in this one because it's like almost a clearish sort of base, and it has some white in it, has some ivory in it, it has some green and yellow in it. It's a really interesting color. It's really interesting, and I think the Beauty Bay, that particular color was ahead of its time, because now we see those sorts of colors in a lot of indie brands, but back then it wasn't nearly as common to find that kind of shade with those sorts of shifts in, well, anywhere. Now we have the Nomad Whistler Snow Lodge palette. I believe this was discontinued last year. By the way, correct me if I'm wrong, if any of these are not actually discontinued. I might be wrong about 1 or 2 of these. Pretty sure this was discontinued last year because they had a big sale on it on Black Friday. It was like 50% off or something. This is a great palette. Again, super well balanced with the depth range and the colors as well. I really enjoy some of these shades in particular. This one right here, Skipum, is a blue, purple, pink sort of shifty shade. This here is kind of like a sage shimmer. It reminds me of one in the On the Horizon palette from Sydney Grace. Up here we've got a white pink shimmer. It's very, very pretty. This palette could go more neutral if you want to play it safe, or you could go really, really colorful, and the colors are fun to work together. The formula is really nice. It's a good palette. In the top 3 now, we have all Udenzai. I love Udenzai. They're my favorite brand for just overarching everything. The color stories that they come out, the packaging is so detailed and visually appealing. It's very busy, but it's beautiful. You know, it's interesting. Besides all of that, I love the formula. The Udenzai mattes are very, very pigmented and rich and full, and they don't move around too much. You put them where you want them to be, and then you just softly blend out the edges. And I like that because I don't want my colors to all sort of muddy in together. I want them to stay where I put them and then be workable from there. And Udenzai mattes do that. And then the shimmers are highly sparkly. They're so pretty. They're still creamy, and they're still a little bit foiled and metallic and shiny, but not so much that you feel over the top. They're a nice balance of shiny and metallic and foiled, but also creamy and soft and sparkly. And that's, I just really enjoy Udenzai. So in number 3 I have the Hella palette when they collaborated for the first time with Angelica Nyqvist. When I first saw this palette revealed, I had a little moment because I'm so drawn to this color story. The green and pink and yellow, it's so light and springy and floral, but this palette also has some depth, and it's got some more murky tones. You know, we've got these yellows mixed with browns, which are not the best on my skin tone, but I'll use them to work with other colors. I'll use them together. It's never going to be a focal point. This shade up here, Rebirth, is a wonderful inner corner matte, and just the quality of this palette and the balance, and again, visually appealing with the lightness down here and then the depth in the opposite corner. It just feels well assembled. It just feels like a good amount of attention was put into the small details, between the names and the colors and the tones and the undertones and the depths. And Angie really knows what she's doing when it comes to eyeshadow. So she knows that you want a good balance, and she does that so well in her palettes. So this is the Hello palette. Then we have the 2 Christmas palettes. I know you're not surprised. Nobody is surprised by this at all. In fact, one of these ranked my #1 palette of I would say last year, but this is going live in 2024. I'm pre-filming a bit because I'm going out of town. But one of these palettes was my favorite of 2022. So I am going to put the Christmas Eve palette in the 2nd spot. These could almost go equally, but I prefer Merry Christmas a little bit more. But the Christmas Eve is just the cool tone counterpart. It is dreamy. It is beautiful. Again, it's the blue and silver, kind of like Blueberry Muffin, but now we have all these other shades as well. A little whisper of Hella over here. A little whisper of Norns maybe. So, so pretty. So, so fun. I love the looks I get from it. I did a whole week of Christmas Eve. I did a whole week of Merry Christmas. So let's talk about that one. This is my favorite palette of 2022, and I would have to say 2023, because this ranking is coming at the very beginning of 2024. So here's the Merry Christmas palette. I think this palette is so remarkable. There's something about the color story that drags me in and makes me feel creative and inspired. I get tons of ideas. I did a week of this one. Did I say that already? It's just so beautiful. I love the balance. I love the weird tones in here, like this one paired with this one. What is that? But it's so much fun. And then this pink, it's not actually as pink as you'd think. It's actually more like a burgundy reddish kind of shade, depending on what you use it with. It's beautiful. It's got lightness and depth. Again, it's got some really interesting multi-chromes, like Elf Wish up here is green, pink, gold. So much fun. Beautiful inner corner, beautiful like brow highlight, beautiful lid shade. Put it all over the place. Mix it with some of these weird mattes. It is such a good time. And there you have it, my friends. My children have officially woken up, so it's perfect timing. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Again, if I were to rank these at a different time, maybe I put them in different order. But honestly, I know for sure that the top palettes would probably be in the same places, because in my collection and even on the market, I don't think anything has surpassed them yet. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Do consider liking and subscribing before you go if you want to see more content like this, and I'll see you soon in my next video. Bye.